Well, let's bring in our panel of parliamentary journalists now. Susan Delacourt is a columnist with the Toronto Star. Joël-Denis Bellavance is the parliamentary bureau chief for Presse. And you also see John Ivison there, a columnist with the National Post and parliamentary bureau chief for Post Media. Susan, let me start with you. The latest sort of developments on the ongoing discussion, debate, international as well, but national focus now on residential schools. The Archbishop of Toronto over the weekend firing back at the Prime Minister over his call for the Church to step up and take responsibility for its actions on residential schools, and for the Pope to apologize, which the Pope didn't do on Sunday. Here we have the Church and the Prime Minister in a war of words here, and Indigenous people sort of watching the finger pointing. What do you make of all this?
I was very surprised by events over the weekend. I did not see that coming. I didn't expect the Catholic Church to respond so quickly and so negatively. And, who would have ever thought we would have seen Justin Trudeau now arguing with the Church, the Catholic Church? I was surprised by how harsh the rhetoric got. It was impressive that the Pope stepped up to some degree, but I was surprised by the way they sort of drew the line, saying, look, we already apologized for what we did in the Americas, so we're sort of covered now. I think even Catholics would probably recognize that was inadequate to the moment here in Canada, but a surprising development. Church versus state. It's not the kind of battle that we expected to see in this century, actually.
Joël-Denis, what are your thoughts on these recent developments?
Well, you can expect the fight between the Church and the government to intensify because searches are going on or will be undertaken in some other residential schools across the country. And we expect to discover more of those remains of kids who have died in those residential schools. So I expect the fight between the government and churches to continue. Now, the Prime Minister, I think would be happy to get an official apology from the Pope. And I know for a fact that he even sent an emissary to the Vatican years ago, 2 years after he gained power in 2015. And the emissary was the current Minister of Immigration, Marco Medicino. When he was a visit to Rome, he went and tried to plead with the Pope to apologize for the role of the Church in the residential schools, and he got nowhere. So there's still some pressure, I think, that will be exerted on the Pope to actually provide adequate apologies for the current circumstances.
John, what's your view on this battle between the Prime Minister and the Catholic Church and the way the Church and even the Pope have responded now? And some people suggesting this is the Prime Minister trying to deflect the response of his own government onto the Catholic Church.
Well, I think, taking on the Pope is not normally a vote winner. But I think that in this case, the Catholic Church is not in a good place. I mean, all the other dominant denominations abjectly apologize for their role in the residential school system. The Catholic Church, various part of the Catholic Church did make apologies, but because the Church is so centralized, it has to come from the Pope, and he has clearly not done that. Benedict did make some kind of statement to Phil Fontaine in 2010, but it fell short of a papal apology. And, the Catholic Church was responsible for 2/3 of these schools, so it bears more responsibility than most. And I think the public sees that.
And I think there's the battle over documents, and Susan, to some extent, is this really all about as this moves forward? Does there seem to be a mood galvanizing around a greater focus on the residential school survivors and what the loss really means, to the extent that if they don't feel there's been a suitable apology, and they're the ones saying that, then doesn't there need to be a suitable apology? I mean, are we sort of there?
Yeah, I think the initial efforts are going to focus on who were these children, and as JD said, we are going to probably find more. So let's get these documents to find out and identify who these children were. I think that's sort of job number one. I think an apology comes behind that, but the two issues are linked because as I understand it from the government, and there is a fundamental difference on this. I watched yesterday as Phil Fontaine was sort of saying, well, one is lying, and you don't normally have a lying, you have to decide between a man of God and the Prime Minister on who is lying. But there seems to be some substantial dispute over whether the Catholic Church does actually even have the material that people need. And that's just the beginning of the argument. So it looks kind of entrenched right now.
Lots to follow on that. John, if I can, let me move to you here. G7 finance ministers wrapped up their meeting on the weekend ahead of the leaders' meeting next weekend with a pledge to tax the digital giants, as Canada plans to do starting next year, and to establish a minimum corporate tax rate around the world of at least 15%. What's the significance of that, and what does it mean for Canada?
Well, it's potentially a big deal because if the G7 finance ministers adopt it, then the G20 finance ministers might adopt it. And eventually the OECD, which is negotiating on behalf of 140 nations, may also adopt it, in which case this could be the end of tax havens. So the idea of squirreling away cash in the Bahamas or Bermuda where there is no corporate tax rate, lots of companies do that. Canadian companies quite legally take the profits that are made in one jurisdiction and transfer them to a jurisdiction with no taxes, and presto, you're not paying tax. And that's been a long-standing story and a bone of contention for decades. All I would say is this is a good step forward. I'm not quite sure why the Conservatives seem to be against it. They're arguing against...
it's an attack on our own sovereignty, giving up our ability to set taxation.
Which it's not, because Freeland has been quite clear. She's going to set the digital tax on the digital giants starting next year. Also, Ed Fast, who is the critic, was the trade minister for Harper, signed many trade deals, all of which impinged on sovereignty, but we did it because it was good for Canada. So I don't know why they're doing that, but it's potentially big. It's not so big, though, that parties like the NDP can already spend the money, because in the 2019 election, they targeted $25 billion of spending, which they were going to fund with the money from something like that.
Let me, time is kind of tight tonight, but let me pivot from that to the talk of election. Joël-Denis, lots of vaccine supply, ramped up vaccination rates, ramped up rhetoric between the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario. MPs who are retiring will be making their farewell speeches in the House next week. Does anyone else see the increasing indications that we're headed to a fall election here? JD, let me start with you.
Well, we've seen a lot of hints dropped by federal parties. I can drop some hints for myself. We are planning for our election coverage here at La Presse today. So that means that everybody's in an election coverage mood. And I expect this to continue. You mentioned the goodbye speeches that will be made by some MPs who do not plan to run again on Tuesday, June the 15th. So that's an indication that even the Liberals admit that we are heading into elections. Everybody's gearing up their machines, and then except maybe if the barbecue season is normal or quasi-normal, you can see, I think you can expect the leaders to be on the hustings this summer and trying to meet as many people as they can, if the conditions allow it.
Right. Susan, what do you think here? The possibility if we don't have an election late summer, early fall, then maybe MPs will make a second round of retirement speeches a couple of years from now.
Encore. The Prime Minister gave a really interesting interview. If you get a chance to watch it, I think CPAC put it on too, with the Star's own Martin Radcon at Ryerson on Friday. And there was a little part in there. He made a face at one point that looked a little bit mischievous about an election. He also sort of started trying to frame it as sooner or later, he said, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to need a mandate about how we build back better. And I said, that sounds to me like somebody who's writing an election platform right now.
All right, John, final word to you here. What signs are you seeing? And do you think the train's left the station now pretty much and we're all going to be on it in a couple of months?
Yeah, I think so. The one question mark I had was that the polls did narrow for a couple of weeks there as we were still in the third wave and it was still dragging on. And, I think they may have had doubts themselves. The most recent poll, including Anana's poll today, suggests that they're well ahead, 10 points ahead, at which point, pull the trigger.
All right. We've got to pull the trigger on our conversation for this occasion. Thank you all for your time, and we'll talk again next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.